Hello, I'm Earl Wajenberg, and this is Book Circle Presents Tales of the Dagda. The Ferncleft Hotel stood in extensive grounds with a yew drive, its own orchard and kitchen gardens, twin rose mazes, and pasture lands rented out to local farmers. It looked like a country house and had been Ferncleft House not that long ago. Before that, it was a knightly manor, and going through a number of other stages, it had started as a mansio on the old Roman road to Drencaster, then Darren Castorum and Caer Theraean before that. Through the bulk of that time, the residents had been sundered, the sort of folk to whom magic things happen, and they were now. As a result, Mrs. Dean was not confused, only wary of the lady in white at the check-in desk. She gave the name Mina Shea, and the dress, gown, she wore was a perfect specimen of the sort worn by Gibson girls over a century ago, in white so dazzling it seemed slightly luminous. Her hair, worn up in a fashion of the same vintage, was platinum blonde and exactly matched the two ostrich plumes on her wide-brimmed hat. The air around her tingled and prickled with magic, which surprised Mrs. Dean not at all. Bold, beautiful, enchanting, eccentric, and with an Irish name. A classic Shia. In a good mood, fortunately. "Yes, ma'am," said Mrs. Dean, consulting her records. "Here's the reservation. 3 rooms on the 3rd floor. If you require additional accommodation, we have some available." She cast a glance behind Mina, where 4 servants were fetching steamer trunks and suitcases. 2 men, 2 women, all tall, fair, and black-haired, all wearing nothing but green kilts and a lot of heavy red gold jewelry. Mrs. Dean trusted no one unsundered would happen along, or that someone here would be quick with the glamour. Oh well, one could always say they were cosplayers. "Oh no, they won't be staying." Mina Shea smiled at the servants, who nodded back and left. "Does one of the rooms have plenty of windows?" Mrs. Dean became peripherally aware of the clop of horse hooves. "Yes, ma'am. 3 rooms in a row, 1 on a corner. Windows on both sides for the corner. Did you have a preference?" "I think we'll put himself in the middle room and herself in the corner room. She has ravens." Mrs. Dean absorbed this information without comment. She also noted the Irish idiom, even though Madame Shea spoke with an upper-class English accent. "Ah, here they are now." The Dagda and the Morrigan entered, trailed by Brian and Sandy. Sandy was still struggling into his T-shirt. Mrs. Dean flicked a glance at the front security camera. No horse, just a motorcycle. Right. Hugan and Munin swooped in and landed on the Morrigan's shoulders. "Oh yes, ravens." The Dagda kissed Mina on the mouth, then twirled his walking stick and turned to the desk. He gave Mrs. Dean a smile, and she felt her breath catch. Definitely a Shia. "A room, please," he said. No, 2. No, better make it 3. "I've done all that, dear," said Mina. "I made reservations a month ago. This isn't a roadside inn any longer." "To be sure. Thank you, darling." Mrs. Dean had summoned her composure and reminded herself that Mr. Dean was the love of her life and much more tranquil company than this fey lord. "Your room is all ready, sir. If I might have a use name?" "The Dagda." Mrs. Dean had read widely in mythology. She had had to. "The Dagda?" "The himself," he returned cheerily. "The definite article, you might say." Mrs. Dean glanced at the walking stick. The Dagda. Club. Eek! She turned wary eyes toward the Morrigan. "And you, my lady?" "The Morrigan." "Another definite article," Mina noted. "Definitely," the Morrigan seconded. She smiled. Mrs. Dean did not find it a nice smile. She realized the Morrigan knew she was nervous and was amused by that. Well, Mrs. Dean knew how to handle such creatures. "Very good, my lady," she said, all business and as brisk as if there were a queue forming behind these old gods. "And do you wish separate accommodation for your attendants?" She nodded at the ravens. "They stay with me." "Very good, my lady. And you, sir, do your manservants stay with you?" "That they do." Mrs. Dean wondered if they would sleep at the foot of the bed or in front of the door. These folk could be very old-fashioned. Well, well, she would offer cots, pillows, and blankets later. and perches. Very good, sir. Lunch is served at noon, a buffet, and there is, of course, 24-hour room service. She rang for the porter. Earl appeared as a stout 4-foot figure in a black velvet jacket. He eyed the new guests cautiously and edged toward the luggage. "You have sheep's eyes?" asked one of the ravens. "I can offer you fish eyes or suet balls right now, sir," Mrs. Dean replied. "We will try to have sheep's eyes in by dinner." Perhaps the halal butcher in Barchester. The Morrigan rolled her eyes and strode toward the lift. The Dagda did not. "My boys will set things up," he told Mrs. Dean. "I'll be taking a walk around the grounds first." With a smile and a wave to Mina, but no explanation, he strode back out the door. Behind the house lay the formal gardens. Behind the gardens rose forested hills. A stream flowed out of them through the gardens, where it acquired tended gravel beds and filled an ornamental pond. Then it ran out east through pastures under roads, eventually to join the river rising. The Dagda had left the tended gardens behind and strolled upstream on a footpath. Behind him rolled the silvery motorcycle, and on the cycle perched Brocker, who was certainly not driving. Brocker stood about 1.5 feet high, a stout figure in shabby work clothes, earth-colored with real earth, 140 years old, but still plenty of wear left in them. His face was round but long-nosed, and his sleeked back hair was white with 2 wide, glossy black stripes over the temples. He balanced on the seat, his hands behind his back, definitely not steering. He tried to ignore the fact that the leather beneath his bare feet was warm, suntan brown, firm like a muscled back, with a suggestion of spine below. The leather on the handlebars looked the same, as did the expanse of leather where, Brocker was pretty sure, motorcycles normally had a bank of dials and lights and such. Brocker could not have reached the handlebars easily, but would not have touched them if he could. He also tried not to meet the gaze of the figure faintly reflected in the windscreen. Blonde-bearded, blue-eyed, the bare torso swirled about with war paint in old patterns, a red cut all around the neck. Within the past hour, the Dagda, crikey, had sauntered up to Brocker, the cycle trailing behind him like a hunter's dog. He had glanced straight through Brocker's glamour and begun asking about Rowan trees. He had ordered Brocker to hop up on the seat and then introduced his vehicle as Leafsverd, leaving Brocker to discover the leather, the reflection, and so on. Brocker had guided them, to the brook and up the path. "There 'tis, Your Honor, above that boulder," Brocker pointed. "There's the branch what split off last winter under the snow. Will that serve, Your Honor?" It might. A voice rang from somewhere at the front of the motorcycle. "If you take that branch, Lord, the tree will lean further over the brook. But if you also take the living branch on the other side of the trunk, it balances back." "Well spotted, son. And then we mingle live wood and dead, which fits, and there will be plenty of both." "Yes." The Dagda turned to Brocker. "Thank you, son, for your help." He reached out and shook Brocker's hand, thereby transferring 3 days' good luck to him. "You're welcome, Your Honor," Brocker exclaimed. "Most welcome." He hopped off the Weir cycle, bowed hastily, and vanished into the bracken. The Dagda put down his stick, took off his boots, shinned up the trunk, paused, then climbed further, no longer heavy. Under the dead branch, he paused again and held out his hand. Below, the Weir cycle folded up like a silvery umbrella, popped into the air as a sword, landed point first on the earth, then sprang up and into the waiting hand. "You don't mind being an axe?" the Dagda asked, nevertheless swinging at the dead branch. Leafsverd added his own strength to the Dagda's. The branch came off in a single blow. "My honors to serve, Lord. It's for you to say how." They turned to the living branch opposite and took it off with equal speed. The Dagda then opened his hand, and the sword leapt out, landing point first at the edge of the brook, looking ready to confer kingship on the next passer-by. The Dagda dropped out of the tree, holding a branch in either hand. He laid them aside, knelt by the stream, and gathered up some sandy mud. "So, Leafsverd," he said, working the mud, "it comes to me this is the first time I've had a chance to speak to you privily, and you spoke just now of honor. Are you content to serve my daughter? To speak plainly, are you her servant now, or her slave?" "Servant, lord." The Dagda glanced at the blade, meeting the blue eyes distantly reflected in it. They met his gaze, knowing he was gauging truth. "I raged at first, I grant, and felt dishonored." He did not mention the horror of it. The Dagda did not bring it up. "But I have thought on it. She took my head in fair fight, no magic, just swordsmanship. Not a Valkyrie, true, but better, a queen in her own right. After I had hung in her head hall long enough to suit her, quarreling turned to bantering. We bargained. In the end, she said she was tired of my skull and would put a new one in the niche, and offered to throw me out to find my way among the worlds, or she would take my service. I gave it." "And no regrets?" The Dagda rose one handful of mud. "None, lord. I would not trade with any Einherjar, if any still live." "Good. Glad I am to hear it." And he jumped into the rowan tree and climbed it one-handed. When he reached the point where he had cut the two branches, he salved the wounds with the mud. He dropped to the ground and surveyed the tree. "Still leans to the water. Let's see what we can do to keep the bank from wearing away under it. Then I think we'll be square with Rowan." He waded into the stream. The sword opened out into the silvery motorcycle again, reared up, and spun its front tire backward against the boulder, while the Dagda heaved at it from the other side. No magic, just muscle, was appropriate here. Soon the water flowed so as to keep the bed from eroding from under the tree. The Dagda climbed out and brushed away the water and mud on the weir-cycle and himself. "Do you ever wish for man-shape again?" he asked, reflecting silently that another man, especially a sturdy Viking warrior, would have been handier just now than an animated motorcycle. "Yes, lord, but she says I should work it out for myself rather than just be given it, as she did with the sword, the shield, and the motorcycle. But new shapes come hard to the mortal-born, I think, or at least to me." "Huh. Well, perhaps we can get you some tutoring." He put on his boots, picked up the stick, and loaded the branches on Leafsverd. They headed back down the path. Sandy glanced around the alleyway. He was pretty sure no one was watching, though someone might well show up soon, curious if they saw a horse ridden into the alley. He dropped the horse form and, with practiced speed, snatched the underpants out of the saddlebag almost before it landed on the pavement. Then out came the jeans, and then the t-shirt. The pavement was unpleasantly hot, but his feet were almost as hardened as the hooves they had been a few seconds before. He shoved the saddle and tack behind a bin and leaned against the brick wall just as a schoolboy came around the corner, his face a study in puzzlement. "Did you see—" he began, but faltered in the face of Sandy's expression of bored hostility. He left. Sandy sighed. Serving his horse to the master was sometimes hard work, but often fun and generally pleasant. Her ladyship was more stringent. Strictly business. He had not been loaned to her very often, and that was fine. How, he wondered as he rubbed his ribs, did she get the effect of spurs when she wasn't wearing any? He didn't think it was magic. He looked up at the tenement beside him and wondered what was going on up there. It was hard to believe she had taken his advice. What would she do with it? Dinah opened to the Morrigan's knock. "Yes?" "You're Dinah. I'm the Morrigan. You could look me up in Wikipedia, but don't trust the details. I have a job offer for you." "What? What do you want?" The Morrigan looked the girl over. Short dark hair, a medium build more blocky than otherwise, shortish. Tired, used to being tired, tired of being tired. Undoubtedly from the 3 part-time jobs, one of which she had just returned from, according to the digital stalking of Hugin and Munin. And speak of the devil, which she took care not to do, there they were on the windowsill behind the girl, trying to make silly faces at her without lips or eyebrows. "I want," said the Morrigan, "to talk to you about Niles, and about a job offer." The girl scowled at her, which the Morrigan admired. Considering the physical differences between them, it showed nerve. "And," she added in a calm and reasonable tone, "I'd like a cup of tea, to talk over, if I may come in." Dinah looked her over for a long moment, then did something brave. The Morrigan could feel it. She had decided, the Morrigan saw, to let in a powerful stranger because the stranger had unexplained knowledge of Niles, and that had to be investigated. Dinah stood back and gestured for her to enter. The Morrigan looked around. It was a flat designed for one, certainly not for two and a baby. The main room had a tiny stove and tinier refrigerator at one end, a fold-out sofa at the other. From the detritus on it, the sofa appeared to be folded out permanently. There was a bathroom full of 2 women's worth of toiletries and a small third room with the mattress on the floor. Judging from the debris scattered on the mattress and the sofa, Jessica slept in the third room, while Dinah slept with Jessica's child on the sofa. A diaper pail was conveniently nearby. Dinah said nothing, but gestured an invitation to sit at a tiny breakfast table by the window. The ravens were still there, and Dinah eyed them curiously. They eyed back. Dinah gave it up and puttered about the kitchen area, making the tea, all without a word. The Morrigan watched the tension in her back and neck. Soon the girl put 2 cups on the table and 1 saucer bearing a pile of animal crackers. "Do you want milk?" she asked, setting down a sugar bowl. "I warn you, it's probably gone off." She looked at the window again. "That's weird. All we get are pigeons and sparrows. Those are the biggest crows I've ever seen." "They're ravens. The tea is fine," the Morrigan said, lying generously. Dinah looked from the oddity out the window to the oddity across the table. "Are they to do with you?" "They work for me." She sighed and opened the window. The 2 strutted in and started to work on the animal crackers. "These are Hugon and Munin. Manners," she told them. "Greet your hostess and don't talk with your beaks full. And before you ask, she does not have sheep's eyes." "Wasn't going to," muttered Hugon, swallowed hard on a cracker, then said to Dinah, "Thank you for your hospitality." "Likewise, I'm sure," rasped Munin. "Nice biscuits." He, too, could lie generously. Dinah took a few seconds to get around the fact of not merely talking, but conversing ravens, then looked at the Morrigan afresh and said, "You said you were Morgana?" "No, the Morrigan. Nothing to do with the Pendragons or Logris." "And you're here about Niles. Is he all right?" "He's with his mother, which does not seem to be the same thing. My father found him astray in the park and returned him to Jessica, who did not seem to care much." Dinah grunted and nodded. "Your father?" "The Dagda. He's the Shia king, the king of the Irish fairies." The Morrigan watched a look of scorn and disbelief die a-borning on Dinah's face as she looked back at the ravens. Hugon was dipping a graham cracker piggy in the Morrigan's tea. Munin, meanwhile, decided to drive home the point. "What fairy tales do you know?" he asked Dinah. "What are the oldest ones, the ones without morals at the end? What do you know about fairies and children?" "Have you heard of changelings?" asked the Morrigan. "That's what he's leading up to. My father found Niles straying in the park, brought him to Jessica, and she said she didn't want him. Said my father could have him." She locked eyes with Dinah. "Offer accepted. We're taking him." She studied Dinah's expression of shock and outrage. Before the yelling could start, she said, "Fays have a hard time having children, so we covet them. Niles will be treasured and loved. He will not be abused or neglected. He won't even be spoiled, though that will be harder. Because my da doesn't just covet him, doesn't just want to possess him. He loves him. Love at first sight. Don't look squicked, I mean paternal love. Now about that job offer. Look down there." She pointed out the window. Dubiously, possibly fearing that the Morrigan would push her out, Dinah rose and peered out and down. There was a man waiting in the alley. It was hard to pick out detail, what with the foreshortened view, but he looked like a rather tidy hippie, barefoot and ponytailed. "That's Sandy. He works for my da. The job offer was his idea. Da was delighted with it. Said Sandy was the best horse he'd ever had." "Horse?" "You'll see. Sandy, understand, is a nice guy. Nicer than me, at least, which is easy. Sandy suggested we hire you to be Niles's nanny. That way Niles will have someone there whom he knows and loves already, making it easier for him. And you will see that he is alive and well, making it easier for you." "Be Niles' nanny?" Dinah said carefully. After he's been stolen by the fairies, Munin concluded helpfully. I recommend it, said Hugin. That way you'll know he's not dead. Dinah blanched. Why would I need... She closed her eyes, took a breath, then said, Why does that have to be pointed out? Because it's going to look like he's died, the Morrigan told her. She looked at Dinah's stricken face, cocked her head, then peered out the window, but up, not down. We're running Sandy's strategy, so I will be nice. I assure you, Niles is not going to die. I swear it by my life, my honor, and my power. The two ravens cringed. Dinah stared at them. Look up there, ordered the Morrigan, pointing out the window again. See the day moon? Little by little, as it circles, the moon gets farther away from Earth, falling out of our sky. Someday, there will be an age when it will be just another evening star. Niles will see that. He won't die. We are taking him. You can't stop it, but you can come with him. She stood up from the table and studied Dinah. The mortal girl looked like she might scream soon. The Morrigan had her own way to fix that. I'll be going presently, and the others will go with me. That will leave you with some strange memories. You will have to decide if you are going mad, or have been drugged, or if it's all true but you still want no part of it, or if you believe what you've seen and accept the offer. Only the last choice gives a chance of being happy. The others lead to grief, especially if you decide to believe the boy is dead. After I leave, I recommend you go out, walk around somewhere ordinary, convince yourself your mind is working. Then you have a few hours to rearrange your assumptions and decide. Now, to give you some more evidence of our abilities, I will do a stunt, and so will Sandy. I will see you soon. We will be back tomorrow, just before dawn. The Morrigan slid the window fully open and jumped out. Dinah screamed, but she also leaned out to look. She saw the Morrigan land feet first in the alley, her arms out like a gymnast sticking a landing. Sandy jumped, and no wonder. And that's her being nice, Hugin muttered. Yep, really pulling her punches, Munin agreed. He turned to Dinah. Don't worry, her dad is a lot more easygoing. He flapped out the window. See you, said Hugin, and followed. Dinah leaned out and looked down again. She saw the ravens spiraling down into the alley. The Sandy fellow was staring up. Perhaps their eyes met. The Morrigan was talking to him. Dinah could see him sigh and then, very oddly, shuck off his t-shirt, then his jeans. He cast an unhappy look at her, then stepped behind the Morrigan. Therefore, Dinah couldn't see exactly what happened next, but suddenly there was a horse behind the Morrigan and a pair of men's underpants fluttering to the ground. The Morrigan hauled a saddle and other horse stuff out from behind a bin. The ravens tucked underwear and t-shirt into a leather bag. The Morrigan pushed the jeans in after, then put the saddle on Sandy's back. The horse looked up at Dinah. She didn't think horses had a lot of facial expression, but this one looked apologetic. Dinah left the flat at a run and clattered down the stairs to walk around somewhere ordinary. And we'll find out something extraordinary next time.